Wow. You sent over some really, really interesting stuff. It seems like everyone's talking about tariffs these days.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic for sure.
And from what I'm seeing in all this material, everyone seems to agree on the basics. Tariffs, they're basically taxes on stuff coming in from other countries, right?
Exactly. Like at their core, it's that straightforward. Tax on imports.
Okay, but the thing is, it's not just about getting some extra cash for the government, right? It sounds like there's a whole lot more strategy going
Oh,
on.
yeah, for sure. Your sources make it really clear. They're being talked about like as a way to help out industries here at home, give them an edge. And to kind of rebalance trade, even as a bargaining chip in global discussions,
Mhm.
that's what makes this stuff so interesting right now.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, not just some boring Econ 101 concept, huh?
Hmm.
We're talking about a real life policy tool that people are like actually using and fighting over.
Yeah, exactly. And the crazy thing is, just this talk about tariffs, the possibility of them changing, is
Yeah.
enough to cause huge waves. Yeah, especially when we're talking about like the US and the EU, these huge economic powerhouses. Like even before anything is actually decided, you see the effects, the stock market reacts, businesses start freaking out about their supply chains, and everyone's worried about inflation.
Oh, wow. So, like, even the threat of tariffs can pack a punch. Okay. So, let's talk about that stock market thing for a second. What's the connection between, like, these tariff talks and actual stock prices going up or down?
Well, think about it this way. When tariffs are put in place, or even when people just start seriously talking about them, companies that rely on imported stuff suddenly have to deal with potentially higher
You're
costs.
right. Right. Makes sense.
And, as you know, your sources point out, that could hit their profits pretty hard. So if investors think a company's going to make less money because of these extra import costs, well, they often start selling off stock, and that drives the price down. The
Yeah.
thing is, what really struck me in your material is how incredibly fast and, like, super sensitive the financial markets are to anything tariff-related, like any news, rumors even.
Wow. So, it's a super interconnected system then.
Told you, yeah.
Gotcha. So, basically, all these investors are trying to guess which companies are going to be hit hardest by these, potential cost increases.
Yeah. They're reading the tea leaves for sure.
So, are there any specific industries that are especially vulnerable? Like, what do your sources say about that?
Yes, and it's kind of fascinating to see how some industries that seem so different are all in the same boat when it comes to this.
Hmm.
Automotive, with all those parts coming from all over the place. And tech, they often need really specific components from different countries. Agriculture gets hit too,
Oh, right, of course.
whether it's tariffs on their exports or the things they need to import getting more expensive. And then, of course, manufacturing in general. I mean, they rely on imported raw materials a lot and need those global markets to sell their stuff.
Wow. I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah. Your sources really emphasize how all these industries are like on the front lines when it comes to tariffs. It really highlights just how globalized everything has become.
Yeah, you're totally right. It really paints a picture of how interconnected everything is. So, one tiny little tariff on something could end up having a domino effect on a whole industry.
Totally. Yeah.
It's crazy. And then, of course, there's inflation. It seems like that's all anyone's talking about these days. How do tariffs play into all that, all those rising prices we're seeing?
So this is a big one, and your sources really lay it out clearly. When those tariffs increase the cost of imported goods for businesses, well, they often have to pass at least some of that extra cost onto us, the consumers. And how do they do that? Higher prices.
Yeah, makes sense.
So whether it's like the raw materials the company needs to make something here that used to be imported cheaply, or just the finished product that's imported and sits on a store shelf, those higher tariffs can really fuel inflation, making everyday things more expensive.
Okay, so that's a pretty clear downside. So, like, with all these potential negative impacts, why are we even still talking about tariffs? Why do people want to increase them?
Well, your material points out a few main reasons. One big one is to protect domestic industries, the companies here at home. There's this idea that foreign competitors, maybe because of lower labor costs or different rules, they have an unfair advantage.
Right, right.
So the thinking is tariffs can level the playing field. And by protecting those industries, well, that should lead to more jobs here at home.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it also means relying less on foreign countries for essential stuff. And then there's that strategic angle we touched on earlier, that some people see tariffs as a way to get leverage in trade talks.
Like a bargaining chip.
Exactly, a way to push other countries to change their ways.
Okay, so it's about supporting the home team, creating more jobs here, and having a stronger voice on the world stage. Sounds like some pretty big potential benefits.
For sure. But it's not all rosy. Your sources are clear about the potential risks and downsides, too.
Like what?
Well, the main worries are about those increased costs. For businesses
Yeah.
that rely on imports, of course, but ultimately for consumers, too.
Mm-hmm.
Higher prices for everyone. They also point out how tariffs can really mess up those global supply chains we were talking about before. Those systems are often incredibly efficient, but tariffs can throw a wrench in the works, leading to, all sorts of inefficiencies and maybe even shortages. And then there's the big one,
Ugh.
retaliation. Other countries hitting back with tariffs of their own. It can
Ah.
turn into this tit-for-tat thing, a full-blown trade war, which could be super damaging for everyone. It hurts economic growth and puts a strain on those international relationships.
Right, that's a great point. It's like one country might slap on a tariff to protect their own businesses, but then another country retaliates and it ends up hurting different businesses back home.
Exactly. It can backfire big time.
Okay, so we've talked about the theory and the potential good and bad. But can we get into some real-world examples? Have there been any recent situations where these tariff disputes have actually played out?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Your sources talk a lot about the U.S.-China trade war. That went on from 2018 to 2020.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's like the perfect example of what can happen when things get out of hand with tariffs. Both countries imposed heavy tariffs on billions and billions of dollars worth of each other's goods. And it really shook things up globally. Markets were disrupted, all kinds of businesses had their supply chains messed up, and prices went up for consumers in both countries.
It sounds like a mess.
It really was. And then, more recently, you have the EU and the U.S. going back and forth over potential tariffs, particularly on electric vehicles and steel imports. It's a clear example of how this is still a very live issue shaping global trade today.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, but also kind of scary.
Yeah, the stakes are high.
So, what about the businesses caught in the middle of all this? Are they just sitting ducks, or do they have any options?
Well, your sources actually suggest a few things businesses can do to try and ride out these tariff storms.
Okay, that's good.
One of the key things is diversifying their supply chains. Not putting all their eggs in one basket so they're not completely dependent on a single country for essential stuff.
Oh, right. Makes sense.
And negotiating those long-term contracts with suppliers. That can help to lock in prices and give them some stability when things are all over the place.
Makes sense.
And then for some companies, it might make sense to relocate, like actually moving their production to countries that are part of tariff-free zones or closer to their customers. And of course, sometimes, though it's not ideal, businesses might have to consider passing some of those extra costs onto their customers.
Yeah, raising prices. That's tough.
Yeah, definitely not a decision any business wants to make.
So it's a lot of strategic maneuvering and managing risks.
Definitely. There's no easy answers.
Okay, well, this has been a really insightful look into the world of tariffs based on all the great material you sent over. It's clear that this is a really complicated issue with a lot of implications.
Yeah, for sure. What your sources all show is that tariffs are not some simple, isolated thing. They're like this super powerful tool that can affect everything, from global supply chains to the price of groceries. And all this back and forth, all these debates, they really highlight the tension between looking out for our own interests and keeping global trade flowing smoothly.
Exactly. It makes you think about the bigger picture, how interconnected the global economy really is, and that every decision can have both the intended consequences and then those unexpected ripple effects.
Totally.
Seeing all this in your sources, it makes you wonder, what does this trend using tariffs more and more, what does it mean for the future, for international cooperation, for how global trade will work? It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it's a big question. Lots to consider.